Okay. Well, in that case, we're good to go.
Do you supply your own cameras and that, or does
For this project, I am, but usually
does the
the
company
CBC
do
does.
that for you?
Usually the CBC provides me with gear, but this is the exception to the rule. So you guys can go right ahead.
All right. So, Clay, what got you interested or what motivated you to start flying?
That's a darn good question. If I had to do it over again, I think I would take a nice easy job because there's lots of nice jobs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to put your life at risk.
Yeah.
But I think it's because your friends, you go where your friends go.
Mm-hmm. So
And
you
all the
had
kids
some,
I knew,
they went into the Air
we,
Force.
there were, I think 3 of us went together.
Now, how
And you
old were
don't
you?
think too much.
No,
I was a little elder than the average.
Okay.
But the average kid, you know, is
His full name, spelling, and his rank and position when he was in the military.
the average kid's under 20, you know, that enlists like that. And a lot of it is excitement and so forth.
Yeah.
But I was a little older. I was about 23.
So what was your official rank? You were flying officer?
Well, the way the Air Force worked originally, everybody was a sergeant when you graduated. And those that were kept home for instruction purposes, they would eventually promote them, say, to an officer, because they would have authority over quite a number of people. But the American Army, Air Force, 3 of the crew automatically got commissioned when they graduated. The pilot, the bomb aimer, and the navigator. The gunners would be sergeants. So when they started that, the RAF, which the Canadian Air Force took their instructions from really, they all started doing the same thing. As air crew, bomb aimers, navigators, and pilots graduated, they automatically made them pilot officers right off the bat. So that when you're overseas and you get a new commanding officer fresh from Canada, he was always an officer. But originally, the first few years, they were all sergeants. And sergeants were, in some areas like Gibraltar, they weren't given much credit. A friend of mine who was killed in Gibraltar was a sergeant, and he wrote me a letter before he was killed, and he said the sergeant pilot was the lowest form of humanity in Gibraltar. You weren't allowed to go in the bars, you weren't allowed to go here, you weren't allowed to go anywhere. But a chimney sweep could go anywhere. But it was very unfortunate. Once you're an officer, you're treated so much better.
And for the camera, Isaac would like me to ask you your full name and formal rank.
Well, John Clayton Kelland, and I was, and when you're commissioned, you become a pilot officer for 6 months. Then you automatically go to a flight lieutenant. One is a single bar, and the flight lieutenant is 2 bars. And the next ranking is a squadron leader. That comes normally if the guy ahead of you gets killed off and he was the squadron commander, you might get that promotion. But in bombing command, those commissions didn't really change. In fighter command, they changed rapidly because the turnover was a little faster.
What was your rank, Clay?
My rank was a flying officer. And you get treated quite well. When you go to a, you normally have a nicer accommodation. You have a nicer mess. You have a little extras. But crew-wise, there's no difference. You associate with your sergeants and the crew just the same as you with the officers.
So you were flying with the Royal Air Force, the RAF?
The RCAF.
RCAF.
I was attached to the RAF for a couple of years. But, well, the only really difference, the commands are the same. The difference is pay, really.
Yeah.
Canadians got paid more money than the poor Englishmen.
So then you obviously had to learn to fly, and training took place where in Ontario?
Yeah, the first thing they do to see if whether you are at all interested in flying, because just because you enlisted as a flyer doesn't mean you're going to fly. And they put you in what they call just a big drum, and they put you on a seat and they swing you around, and there's a horizon, and they just tell you to stop at a certain point. And you come along, and of course, you don't stop too quickly. It takes a while to get adjusted to the feel of these. They're so sensitive. And if they see, I think the instructors just kind of look you over and say, yeah, he likes it. He good. He'll be okay. Well, then they send you away, and mostly ground school. You don't do any flying for the first 6 months. You have to learn what an airplane is and what it does and its characteristics, and all aircraft are different. But you don't, the first time you fly is, well, you understand what navigation is and what airspeed is, what ground speed is, and you learn little different oddities of the aircraft. All aircraft are different, and you don't get a second chance. You make a mistake, and usually it's all over. Did you ever, you remember the Mosquito?
I know that it was a very small plane, essentially.
It was a twin engine.
Yeah.
It was made in de Havilland in Toronto, made of plywood, beautifully designed. It looked beautiful. It was one of the worst aircraft to fly. I lost a personal friend that was killed the second time he flew it. All he was set out to do was circuits, and what they call circuits of bubs, takeoffs and landings, to get accustomed to the feel of the aircraft. And on his second trip around, he was killed because it had a very bad characteristic. It had what you call a very high stalling speed if you put your wheels down at the wrong spot. And when you turned into a runway in a Mozzie, you never dropped your wheels until you were lined up to the end of the runway. If you dropped them on your turn, you'd just drop right out of the sky because the stalling speed was so severe. And he had a lot of flying hours. He had flown on the Alamand for 2 or 3 years, flying every day, but he flew Ansons, which you couldn't stall. You know, they were so safe. It's impossible almost to make them crash. And he got in the habit of flying an Anson where you could let your wheels down at any position, even on your back if you wanted to. Whereas he came into, on the Mauser, he was coming into land and he just automatically let his wheels down like he did on the Ensign, on the turn. And he was at 500 feet and he just went straight into the ground. But this is really what killed so many kids. Inexperience, bad habits, not recognizing that you don't get a second chance. Second chance, you take a bomber, like I flew Halifax, 4-engine, and to stall it, we used to go up, say, to 10, 15,000 feet, and you just reduce your airspeed to the point the aircraft didn't have enough speed to fly, and all it did was mush. And then the nose would go down and would gather speed and would come back up again. It was beautiful. You didn't have to worry about it. But we had an aircraft for a conversion, a two-engine aircraft called the Oxford. And if we've flown on single engine, you have to convert to two-engine to start. Well, the Oxford was a sporty little aircraft, and it had a very bad characteristic. If you came into land and you were too high, and you decide, I better go around again and make sure I can land properly, you couldn't raise you had flaps that you would lower to reduce your speed. You couldn't pull those flaps back up until you got up to 3,000 feet, because the aircraft would just drop right out of the sky if you had just flip them up. And where we trained on that aircraft, somebody had overshot the runway and had done that, pulled their flaps up too quickly, and what was left was a pile of wreckage at the end of the runway. So they just left it there to teach the students that's what happens if you don't do what you're told. But the old Halifax, you could pull your flaps up anytime you wanted. It didn't make any effect as far as the speed you were flying at. And this is where the age, young kids did things they shouldn't have done. They killed themselves. There was so much of that.
Could you
I think one of the best examples of that was one night we went to Hamburg, and the Germans were pretty honest. They used to broadcast after a raid like that how many aircraft they'd shot down, and they said they'd shot down something like 22 or something, which was par for the course. And when we got back to the North York in England, we had 27 fires in the hills caused by kids trying to land, coming out of cloud and not checking to see where they were properly, and they were hitting the hills, and if they lost 22 over the target, they lost 27 at home, just over our group. And there are a lot more groups than ours. They would average somewhere between 500 and 700 aircraft every time there was a trip. So that's a lot of aircraft.
I noticed reading through your flight log that your instructor's ratings on your single engine and two engine aircraft were not fantastic. You got passing marks, but just so-so.
That's right.
But then when you got up to the 4-engine craft, the Halifax and the other 4-engine craft, all of a sudden you were pretty good.
Well, that was experience. You learn the hard way. I flew a lot of flying where I wasn't on operations. And I saw a lot of kids killed and came close to killing myself many times. And you learn the hard way. If you're lucky enough to get through it, you stop doing stupid things, like low flying, for example. We used to go up to, what do they call that beach? Long Point in Harvard. And we'd go right down on the sand and make the people dive into the water. As kids, you do stupid things like that. And every once in a while, somebody would make a turn and hit a post or something that they didn't see. And that was the end. And once you've seen a bad accident, the last time I low flew was on a cross country to Scotland, and it was called low level. Well, low level meant 100 feet. You weren't supposed to go below 100. This gave the navigator, who was a student, a chance to map read at a low level, which is a little more difficult than higher up. You can see so much further when you're up at, say, a couple of thousand feet. But when you're down at 100, you can't see much more than 100 yards. So to pick out things, they got to be very quick. And we were horsing around, and we went down, and I didn't know it, but I flew under a high tension wire. The fellow with me hit the wire, and he was in the ground in about 10 seconds. He just flipped on his back and went straight in. And it so happened he was a very good friend. I never saw the high tension wire. I was just lucky that I missed it. I saw his wing, a piece come off his wing, and I thought it was a bird or something. And when I went to interrogation with the officers, they explained to me that that was his wing, and it wasn't a bird. He hit the wire. And that was the last time I ever low flew.
So you're a quick learner when
It was
you
a
see
tough
something
lesson.
wrong.
But if you don't get a lot of flying and see those things, you end up on a squadron with no experience. We were on a trip one night over, and this was just over France to support the troops after D-Day. And all I saw was 4 red engines, and I ducked. Well, it didn't make much difference because he missed me. He went underneath me. But we must have come within 10 feet of hitting head on. And when I got back to the mess that night after the trip, I said, who was the idiot that flew a reciprocal course over the target? And this kid across the table said, I almost hit somebody, he said. You know, it shakes you because it's not just what you do, it's what the other guy does. Like, you don't ever turn around and, just because you missed the target, turn around and fly back against the bombing stream. You're asking for trouble because there's too many people at the same height, you know. But at night you have to watch it because you fly into each other and you don't see anything. It's too dark.
And you're not using lights.
You see an explosion. Well, it's 2 aircraft came together. But it'd be tough for the Air Ministry to figure out just what happened to those aircraft. they they probably put them down to enemy action, but daylight raids used to scare you because you'd see the explosions. You'd see some poor kid ahead of you, and somebody above him would drop a bomb on him, and it would knock his wing off, and then you'd just go into a spiral, and you'd pray that somebody would jump out of it. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But you have no control.
No.
Once your wing's off, you're in a spiral, and there's no way the force of spinning just keeps you in your seat. You can't even get out.
Now those planes weren't exactly comfortable. You didn't have nice reclining seats.
Oh, no, see, the British did a super job. You know, they had nothing. And if the Prime Minister hadn't, Chamberlain hadn't stalled the war, the Germans would have just walked right through England because they had no defense at all. The Hurricane fighter was about it. And if you talk to some of the old timers, they'll tell you, boy, they deserved a lot of credit building these bombers and getting them built. The problem was they didn't have any pilots. And that's why we were trained as fighter pilots. When you got overseas, they didn't need fighter pilots, they needed bomber pilots. So they had to start setting up schools to train guys to fly four-engine. They had to train navigators, they had to train bomb aimers, they had to train gunners, and that took time.
Of course.
But
can you tell us about the year you enlisted and why?
Pardon?
Isaac would like to hear about the year you enlisted and the reason. We touched on it a little bit. It was because your friends did.
Well,
and you were 23, so that would have been...
the reason I didn't enlist when I was 20 is because I worked at Stelco, and the sales department that I was in, they closed it because we needed everything we sold at that point. Although it was just waste materials, we had to use everything. So I went into the orderly department with a chap that was in our sales department. He was on the road, actually. And the two of us started producing the orders to the mill to build destroyers, anything that floated, really. And we had to get these orders from the shipbuilders, check them out to see what had to be ordered on the mill. And we used to work to 10 o'clock every night, no problem, checking, and because when you want, say, the first thing to build a ship, you want the keel plate. Well, the keel plate had to be so thick, so wide, so long, and a certain type of steel and so forth. When the orders came through, we had to check to make sure they had the right sizes and the right weights for the steel. And then we had to have a girl type them. Then we had to check the orders and send them to the mill. We made one mistake once. We didn't send the keel plate. We made a mistake in the measurements, so they couldn't use it for the keel. The girl, instead of typing in something, she made it 2 inches smaller in width. And the shipbuilder he didn't care. He just sent us a note saying that we had to roll this special plate for him because we had messed it up. He kept the other. He'd use that to patch and do something with it. But it made quite a disaster order because you didn't roll that plate the next day. You know, you had to schedule it. It might be a month. So in the meantime, that shipbuilder couldn't build his boat. So I did that for 2 or 3 years. That's why I really didn't get interested in the Air Force or anything else for a while. But I don't know. To this day, I really don't know why I picked the Air Force. I think primarily I was in the RHLI militia, and I went to camp in Niagara-on-the-Lake one summer, and it was a complete disaster, the way you got treated. And I thought, oh, I can't go in the Army. It was just that bad. The food was just terrible. We just couldn't eat it. In fact, I got a job in the officers' mess for a while, just to enjoy life a little bit. But I think that's primarily why I went to the Air Force. But I had friends in the Navy, and after the war, I thought the Navy was pretty good too. You don't go in as a kid with losing your life. You don't think of things like that. Unbelievable, you don't. Otherwise, you'd pick a job. There are lots of jobs in the Air Force that are not dangerous. I have coffee every morning with an Englishman from, actually he's a Scotsman. He's been over here since 1956. And he was in the Air Force. He was in ground crew. He spent all his time in India, Egypt. He went all over the damn world.
But he never got up in the air. And
never got up in the air. Never had any problems of losing his life or anything like that. But you don't think of that anyway. Even when you're on a target, you don't. You think of, I think I told you, Vern, as a kid, as a pilot, your responsibility is the crew. As a crew, every man is for each man. Every man he will risk his life to save the other guy. That's just the way it is.
So I think you enlisted in 43, was it?
Yeah.
And you were about 2 years in training here before you
Yeah,
went over?
it takes you I would say a year to get through elementary flying.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of other things that come in after that. But you don't get a lot of flying hours. If you learn to fly from scratch and graduated as a fighter pilot and got posted to a fighter squadron, you wouldn't have too many flying hours. You wouldn't have too much experience. So that's one of the reasons fighter pilots had quite a turnover. Whereas in the bombers, you were trained as a fighter, then you had to go to conversion units. First of all, you'd go to two-engine trainers. Then you go to two-engine operational aircraft like Wellington bombers, which were used at the beginning of the war down in Africa. And then you'd go to four-engine conversion. Then you'd go to a squadron to get a more up-to-date four-engine aircraft, because each aircraft that you train on in the two-engine normally is something that has been in operations, is now obsolete, and it's now being used as a trainer. And that's the same with the four-engine.
Yeah.
the four-engine Halifax I flew first had a different type of engine than the one I had in the squadron. It had no power. The aircraft was entirely different.
And then eventually you got into a bomber squadron in Halifax. And how many missions did you fly before the last one?
Usually you fly between 20 and 25, and then you're sent home. We did 18, but if we had finished, I think we'd have had to go to about 23 before I'd have been stood down. But a trip to Berlin or a trip to Hamburg or Gelsenkirchen or any of those Ruhr Valley places, they were considered number one. If you went to Calais in France to help the army, you might do 3 or 4 of those a day, and they would only count as a half or something like that, because they weren't considered as dangerous. Although anything, once you get up, everything is dangerous, you know. As a kid flying in the opposite direction that you are, that was over Calais, France, and that happened. But you don't, see, when you get in the Air Force, you get trained to a degree. Like I was told once, at a old kind of a refresher course on four-engine aircraft, I remember the instructor saying, if you ever lose 2 engines on one side of your aircraft, on a four-engine aircraft, make sure you turn into your good engines. Don't turn away from your good engine, because if suppose you got 4 engines, you got 2 on the left side. If those 2 engines quit, you got to turn into the good engines on the right. If you turn to the left, these engines will overpower your turn and shoot you straight into the ground. Now that was just mentioned as a comment. So the first night we're trying, we have a Halifax cross country on a conversion. So this aircraft doesn't go too well, and we had to go down somewhere down towards London from Yorkshire, and we get halfway down to London, and we lose a right engine, a starboard engine. So I get the engineer to stop the engine, and we have to take the prop and turn it so it cuts through the air and it doesn't windmill. While we're doing that, the other engine winds up and it's destroyed, so we have to stop it. So now we've lost both engines on the right, and we're miles from home. We're way down by what they call the Wash, which is halfway to London, and start heading back home. And we're at 10,000 feet, but we can't hold the 10,000 feet. The engines on the starboard end, left on the port, won't hold the aircraft at its height, and it's just quietly losing altitude. And unfortunately, we're flying into a north wind, so I look out and there's the Wash. It's a big bay in the ocean, and 5 minutes later, it's still there. It hasn't moved because the wind is so strong that it's not allowing us to make any headway. So we decided we're losing altitude. We're now down to 3,000 feet, and we've come all the way from, say, 10 to 3, and we're still at the Wash. So we decided we better get in. So I told the kids, I said, okay, everybody bail out, and I'll keep my engineer, and the two of us will take the aircraft in. And these kids, they wouldn't leave the aircraft. That's just how you become. So they all went to the back and lay down on the floor, and we decided to try to get in. So we asked to get in, and on the first turn, you almost have to turn the aircraft on its wing to make it turn, because you're turning into the good engines, which you're trying to keep it from turning. And we lost something like 1,000 feet just on the one turn, and we got another couple of turns to make. So we finally got in and wind up with the end of the runway, and we shot off a cartridge to show that we were in trouble. And we hit the end of the runway and bounced up, and we ended up running through the runway. But we got down, and it was quite, these kids, I remember the mid-upper gunner, he jumped out, grabbed a handful of dirt, and came up and threw it right in my face. He was so happy to be on the ground. But the aircraft, your hydraulics for brakes and all these, and your flaps and your wheels and all these things, they're all, a lot of them are on the starboard engines. So when we landed, we had no brakes. And that's why we ran off the end of the runway. We had no way of stopping. And we just ended up in the mud. So, they sent somebody down to look at the aircraft. And I don't know who this kid was. We came and he said, I told him we couldn't turn the prop on the inner engine. So it windmilled all the time we were trying to fly. And he said, well, you can't change your prop when your engine is running. And I said, on a Halifax, that is the first thing you do is press the button, which automatically switches the prop so it has no thrust. And I said, no, not with a Halifax. You're talking about the Lancaster. The Lancaster is reverse. The first thing you do is shut your engine off, and then you try to change your prop. In the Halifax, the first thing you do is press the button. So he got in, and he thought I was nuts, so he got in and started the engine up, and it caught fire. So that really scared him.
Yeah.
So we were lucky that we didn't have the fire. But we had a fire once over a target, over Kiel, and we had just dropped our bombs, or getting ready to drop our bombs, and the starboard inner engine caught fire, and of course, it's what you call the panic button. As kids, everybody starts yelling, and what are we going to do, and all this. So there is a button to put out, you press a button on your dash, which sets a fire extinguisher off in your engine, which is supposed to put the fire out. But that's the engineer's job. You tell him what to do, and this kid just reaches across my shoulder and presses the button, hoping that it's the right button. And as soon as he did that, the fire went out. And we're still over the target, you know. It makes you feel good to see the fire out. So we dropped our bombs and came home, but we didn't fly too speed. We had to cut our speed back, and we arrived home rather late. But the fire was caused by an incendiary bomb. It caught in the cowling of the engine, and the reason the fire went out is it burned a hole through the metal and fell out just as we pressed the button. So I was talking to my rear gunner, and he said he was going to get out of his turret. He said he had to turn his turret and fall out. But when he turned the turret, he said the flame from the engine was licking the side of his turret. So he said, I was afraid to jump out into the flame, so I said, I just sat there. So he came home with us. So otherwise, we'd have lost him over Germany. But those things kind of, having a lot of flying hours, you
gain experience.
You don't rush those things. You know, your crew appreciates it because I had the experience. They didn't. I did. So I made sure we did the right things. Yeah. In the meantime, these kids are just jumping all over the place. You know, because they're getting pretty scared. It doesn't take much to get you scared.
Now, your last mission, was that at night or was it a daytime?
No, it was a daylight.
Daylight. And
yeah.
What hit the plane? Was it a fighter?
No, we don't know.
We don't know. Maybe flak?
We thought it was flak because it was daylight. We were over Dusseldorf, and we were still a fair distance from our target. And we were... well, you could see all the aircraft around, and the fellow ahead of me was being shot down by flak, and wherever he went, there was a burst of flak right at his tail. He was doing everything to get away from it, and we were watching it, and while we're watching it, our aircraft goes and we get hit by something, and all of a sudden, we don't have any controls. And once you lose your controls, the aircraft just kind of does that. Falls away and then falls on its back and then just starts to spiral. And to this day, we don't know what it was.
But flak would be your
I have an
guess.
idea what it was, but I don't think the air ministry would appreciate it. The controls to build the aircraft, they had to build as fast as they built them. They weren't very special as far as controls were concerned. They just used clothesline wire. And your pedals, which controlled your wings, were just attached to wires in the body of the aircraft. Same with the tail. To make the tail up and down or sideways, you just did certain things, and the wires would do the pulling. Well, they get worn, and as you can well imagine, with the maneuvers you do to get away from anti-aircraft or fighters, you put an awful strain on those wires. And I kind of, Lord, they can get hit with a piece of flak and snapped. And once they go, your aircraft is useless. You just get out as fast as you can. Didn't take long for the boys to get out.
No.
I just had to tell them, bail out, and they were. The aircraft of Halifax has got a rear gunner who goes out backwards. He just turns his turret and falls out. The mid-upper gunner has to come out, get out of his turret, and go through and take a panel off the floor and drop out. the engineer, bomb aimer, navigator, wireless operator, they also have a panel on the floor, and they release it, and they just roll out through the hole.
Can we stop for a minute?
And your two eyes are supposed to go in
Right,
and hold that.
right.
Mine used, one would go in and it'd fly out again. So the guy was testing me. He said, no, he said, you're no good for air crew as far as flying is concerned, because you can't judge distance because your eye won't stay in. He said, we'll make a gunner out of you. So when you're at Manning Pool, they ask all those for air crew step forward, or pilots, I'm sorry. I think all pilots step forward. So I had a couple of buddies from the States, so I stepped forward with them, and both of them were made instructors. And they had their own aircraft in the States. One was from, his old man had a Pepsi-Cola bottling plant down in Virginia. The other fellow he worked in Pittsburgh area, and they both had their own aircraft. They didn't own them outright. They shared them with a bunch of people, but they used them every week. They go flying, and that's how I got to become a pilot. I just stepped forward with them, and I learned to train my eye. I used to exercise it until I got headaches, and finally the eye got strengthened up.
Learned its lesson.
But I knew what happened. I got hit in the eye with a puck. I was playing goalie, and somebody lifted a puck into my eye, and it had bruised the eye, I guess. But it was quite an experience.
Oh, I guess. So we were talking about when your plane went down, and your crew were lucky to get out quickly.
Well, they got out in a hurry. In about 2 seconds, I'm the only one left in the aircraft as far as I know. And unbeknown to me, my mid-upper gunner got caught in his turret. I think his harness or something got caught, and he couldn't get out. And what saved him was that I started to get out of my seat to get out, and I thought, there has to be a better way. I just didn't want to jump out into that at 20,000 feet, because that's the height we were flying. And I got back in my seat, and I tried to get the damn aircraft turned around, which I did, actually. And then it started to roll again, so I decided, got to get out. So I had to push myself out because it was almost on its back when I did get out. But this mid-upper gunner got out just before I did. I saw him. When I was coming down, I could see another parachute just below me, and that was him.
So that extra time.
And that was lucky.
Yeah.
You know, that's just pure luck. It's unbelievable. You got to be lucky.
Yeah.
But I don't know. We met a lot of great people in the Air Force. Not just air crew or guys you flew with, but civilians. You know, I don't know if you ever heard of Mrs. Buckingham. Mr. and Mrs. Buckingham had a pub in Ossington. It was near Stratford-on-Avon, and we used to every night after flying, we'd go up to the pub. It was called the Fox Head Inn. It was a fair walk from where we lived, but it was a nice pub, and Mr. and Mrs. Buckingham were real nice people. So usually it was only about 4 of us. A couple of the crew never mixed with us as much as the officers mixed with themselves. And the last night we were there, Mr. Buckingham came over and said, I understand you're graduating today. And I said, yeah, this is our last drink. So he said, well, we'd like to invite you back to the house after we close the pub. He said, we'd like to do this for the cruise. So we hung around outside after he closed, and when they locked the place up, they lived just down the street, so we walked down the street with them. There were only the 4 of us, and we get in there, and they got tomato sandwiches, cases of beer, and they said, well, we're going to bed. You have a party. Needless to say, we had a party. It was quite a party. We didn't leave too much beer.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Can I just hold your glass for a minute? Isaac's getting but whenever you need a drink, just.
Well, I can hold it quietly.
Oh, all right.
I don't have to shake it.
All right. Now, I understand that you, when you landed near a church or on a church?
Yeah. Well, you land pretty heavy. It's like equivalent to jumping out of a 2-story window. And you don't, like at 20,000 feet, you don't fall more than, say, 1,000 feet a minute. So it takes you 1,000 feet a minute. That's 20 minutes to come down 20,000. You don't think you're falling at all. You're a little uncomfortable because you're putting a lot of weight on in your crotch, but when you get near the ground comes up very quickly. And well, I don't know what height we were at, but we were quite a height. And I could see this church, and I was drifting towards it. And while I'm watching a church, some German takes, I guess he had a rifle, took a pot shot at us, at me, and I could hear it zing past, and I thought, good heavens. So I started to pull the cords and try to make it swing, and then another one would fly by. And they made I think he only shot about 3 or 4 times. And in the meantime, I see the church coming up, and the ground is coming up rather rapidly, and I missed the church, thank goodness. I hit a ditch right beside the fence, and smashed my knee all up. And the field beside the church just full of soldiers and civilians. Like, of course, they can watch you coming down, and they all go to where you're going to land. So they're all there. So some soldier takes over anyway and marches me off. But I guess it was a couple of weeks later, I was in a hospital, and I asked an American, I said, how close does a bullet have to come so you can hear it? And he said, too damn close. That's all he said. Yeah. If you can hear it, that's too close. But the chances of hitting you, I don't think would be too great, but you never know.
No, no. It would be
You don't
a
think
lucky
of those
shot,
things.
or an unlucky shot if it
Yeah.
actually did hit you.
Yeah, it could be. But we killed a lot of boys that, through inexperience. They're just kids. You know, you take some of them are 18, 19 years of age,
Yeah.
and they get out in an aircraft, and it's just like a hot rod car, you know.
Boy.
They try to do things with that aircraft that they do with a car, and you don't get a second chance. I lost a very good friend in, I think it was in Ontario. He was an instructor when he graduated, and he had to go on cross countries with the students, like across country. They'd take them up, and they would fly a certain course at night, because trying to read a city at night is entirely different than daylight. You can't see train tracks or things like that. And he used to, I thought he had the softest job in the world. And they were in Harvard. And he would sit in the back seat, let the pilot do all the work, but then he'd go to sleep. Well, one night the pilot, he got lost and got panicky, just a kid, and he crashed, and he killed the instructor and himself. And I thought, gosh, you know, if he'd been awake,
Yeah.
stayed awake,
He could have done something.
but there again was inexperienced. He wasn't that old, and he just took it for granted the kid knew what he was doing, and he didn't. So you kind of became an old fuddy-duddy sometimes,
Very
doing
quickly.
things that the other guy might not think are too smart.
I'm still hearing the ice.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hospital, was the medical facility fairly good, or?
Sorry, Barrington, I just kicked you.
Well, it was a German hospital, just actually for the German army,
Yeah.
but it was well done. I guess I hit my head when I was trying to get out through the hole in the floor, and had a big gash in it. They weren't very gentle with me, let's say, but that didn't matter. They cleaned it all up and wrapped my head up. But then I went to a little hospital, and that was quite interesting. It was full of Germans, just kids that were wounded. A couple of them were quite old, actually. There was one guy that had been in the States for something like 20 years, and he decided to go home on a visit. And of course, he couldn't get out. And he was driving a truck or something, and he got hit. But I was well treated. They used to like to ask me questions about what I was flying and where I was flying to, and all about the Air Force, really, because they were all Army guys. And every time I answered a question, they'd give me a cigarette. So by the end of the first day, I had all the cigarettes in the ward. But they were good kids. They were just doing a job the same as we were, you know. I was in Doodledore,
Yeah.
where the hospital was.
And then how long were you in the hospital before you got to the
about a
camp?
week, I guess.
About a week, and then
Yeah.
off to the camp?
Then then you have to go to interrogation, and interrogation's at Frankfurt, which is miles from everywhere else. They put you on into box cars. And it's an overnight trip, and they're just like cattle cars. You just lie on the floor and they lock you in there. That, of course, you don't know. You don't know where you're going, and you don't know what they're going to do with you. So there's a lot of imagination used.
Oh, I guess so. I suppose that's part of the interrogation technique, that you don't know
Well,
what's
you know,
happening.
the interrogation, the first thing they do is strip you and check you right over to make sure you're not carrying something. And then they give all your clothes back, and they give you a comb and a handkerchief, that's all. And they put you in a cell. And they just leave you. Oh, they serve you a bowl of imitation soup or something once a day, and just leave you. If you want to go to the bathroom, you pull a toggle on the wall, and it drops a flag in the hall, and the guard comes and takes you down to the washroom. And the idea was to go to the washroom as often as possible, because it's amazing the number of guys that were down there. Every time you went down, you saw somebody you knew. And eventually, I called to say, after a week, they hadn't done anything. So I called to see, what's the score? Have you forgotten me or what? Well, they apologize and immediately take you and interview you and tell you all about yourself. They had all the information. They had all my marks at school. They had all my instructors. They had all my call signs I used on the squadron. They had all the information. They knew exactly what I flew, where I was shot down. They knew everything on the aircraft. They try to fool you into, they'd ask you a question. Did you have radar? And I just told them I didn't know. I was a navigator's job. He said, well, I'll tell you. So they could tell me what I had on the aircraft. And he was right. Yeah. And he was right on, the only thing he had wrong was my CO, squadron CO. He had been shot down some time before, or disappeared, and he didn't have his name change. He still had him flying as my CO, and he hadn't been for quite a while. So they did mess up once in a while. Yeah. But they had all the information of schooling when we were in the Air Force in Canada. This guy was pretty sharp. He spent, I think it was 3 or 4 years in London at Oxford. And he spoke absolutely beautiful English.
And then you'd be transported to the camp after the interrogation?
Yeah, they go through a little act, trying to see whether you understand German. And my navigator, who was German, he understood every word, so he told me what they talked about. And all they're interested in is, do you understand German? Because if you do, we're going to use you. They need people that are prisoners to help them get around some of the problems they have with prisoners. So all they're interested, and the act is actually it's humorous. And Gil says all they're looking for was a little crack in your eye, which showed you understood. That's where you smile first, in the corner of your eye, evidently. And I remember he used to be staring at me. I couldn't figure what he was looking at. And the last thing he says to a girl that comes in and puts an act on, and he said, "Okay, go outside and wait for the next one. He doesn't understand us." So it's quite interesting when you understand all that. I didn't understand it. I just smoked his cigarettes. And they tasted so good, I hadn't had one for so long. Made me cough pretty good, too. But then they just send you to your room. They give you a book to read. And I never even opened the book. They moved me that night, had me on a train going to interrogation or going to a camp. I have to send you to a camp to get equipped because you're still in all your flying gear at interrogation. But before you go to a camp, you have to go and get fumigated, and they give you mostly American. We had American uniform, a great coat, a hat, boots, the whole works. And then they send you on to a camp. It was quite interesting at the camp. I arrived at the camp, and I guess there's a trainload of us, and they put you in a room, and the idea is they have to identify you, who you are. Like these are the guys that run the camp. Canadians or Americans or whatever they might be, and so they ask you a lot of questions. Do you think you know anybody in this camp? Who was your crew? Maybe he's here. And I saw my navigator come in, and he went around and took a look at everybody. Then he turned around and walked out. He didn't recognize me. Because I'd been down for a while and been in the hospital, and then I had grown a mustache. And so when this fellow started interviewing me and asking if I knew anybody, I said, "Yeah, my navigator's here." I said, "Who's he?"
We have to pause for a minute while Isaac. We're good to go again.
Pardon?
We're good to go again.
We're okay to go.
So you were saying you recognized your navigator.
Yeah, and so they called him back up. And Gil was he lived in Montreal, and he was a trumpet player. He was one of these hard trumpet players where the cheeks all pop out, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody knew him in camp because he had a trumpet. He had borrowed a trumpet from somebody that had one sent over from family earlier. And this is just before Christmas, so at Christmas time they have they put a little play on. And Gil was in the band. Oscar Peterson played in his band in Montreal when Oscar was just a young guy.
Yeah.
They came to the Brant Inn one year, and it was a fun thing. Everything was kind of crude, you know. They did things that because they're all men,
Yeah.
and the Germans enjoyed the show because good music. Gil was an arranger, and he did a lot of the arranging, and they had some good Broadway musicals. It was a lively show, a lot of comedy, kind of crude, but good. And the Germans used to come in and watch the show, and they really would enjoy it. This one German came in. He took his belt off to give himself some breathing room. So somebody stole his Luger. The minute he took that belt off and the Luger was lying loose, somebody stole it. Well, then, of course, he was devastated. He went in to the CO and told him that what did he have to do to get his Luger back? So they said, well, we need this tube, this tube, this tube for our radio. So he delivered the tubes. Now he can't tell the Germans he's delivered the tubes because they think we got a radio, but they don't know. But if he tells them, he's going to get shot for giving it to us to start with, losing his gun. So we used to get the BBC News every night. And we used to compare it with the Germans, and it was very close, very similar.
Now you were in Stalag III?
Yeah, it was the satellite of the one that they made the movie of.
Yeah, The Great Escape.
It was just down the road. It was like, you could walk between them.
Yeah.
Like when we walked out of camp, the Russians moved us, or the Germans moved us to another camp when the Russians were coming, and we walked through the other camp.
But you
It had
never
already been deserted there.
so you never met Steve McQueen or...
No. There wasn't a soul in the camp. We were, I guess, they were a little bit ahead of us. But
what was the camp experience like? It can't have been very luxurious, not like a five-star. What was the camp like? It can't have been like a five-star hotel.
Well, it was one of the original camps in the First World War, the last one we were in.
Yeah.
And it was well equipped. Of course, they had no food. They had a tough time feeding us because they had no food for themselves. But, we used to just lie in our bunks and wait for the next bowl of soup to come. It was pretty raw stuff, like seaweed and stuff. We had, when the Russians took over, they liberated us. They supplied the soup, and all they did was take a pig and throw them in the vat and boil them, because it had everything in it. Like my bowl had 2 or 3 teeth in it when I got to the bottom, and I had other things in there I didn't know what were, and I ate them, but only because I was hungry. But the Germans did their best.
Yeah.
They were always very decent to us.
Now, I read about the Great Escape, so I read about them calling out roll calls in the middle of the night. And
They did
snowstorms.
that. They always did that.
Yeah.
They knew. They'd come in and say, 2 o'clock in the morning, and you'd be sound asleep, and they'd get everybody out on the parade square in the middle of winter, and they always lined us up in fives, 5, 5, 5, 5, so they could count just 1, 2, 3. So it made it easy. And if a tunnel was being built, the guys in the back row would, as soon as they were counted, they'd run like mad and sneak into the next aisle so that they would be included again. So they would cover up those that were in the tunnel. But a very good friend of mine was in the tunnel. I went to school with him, and he was actually in the tunnel when the Germans discovered the tunnel. And he came back into the barracks. And that's one of the reasons he lived through prisoner of war. Otherwise they'd have shot him, because everybody that did escape was shot. But he said he was maybe 20 yards from the end of the tunnel when he heard they had discovered the outlet, so he just came back in.
So there were tunnels in your camp as well as in the other, where they made the movie.
You never, unless you were involved. I don't think we had a tunnel.
No.
Not
okay.
in the satellite. No. The-
You wouldn't know unless you were directly involved in the digging.
yeah,
or
but
some part
I
of it.
think you would know if there was one going on, because they went down through the heater, the Quebec heater. Like the heater was just sitting on the floor, so they moved the heater and dug the hole where the heater sat. So when the Germans came, they just put the heater back.
Yeah.
So they couldn't find the hole, the beginning of the hole, because it was covered by the stupid heater. And they never even thought of looking under the heater. But it wasn't just one person, you know, there was a lot of guys involved.
Yeah.
It was quite a, I still can't believe, because the earth that we had was red. So when the kids dug it and they put it in their pans, they took it out. They had strings on it around the bottom of their pans, and they took it out to the parade square, and they released, and then they kind of shuffled it into the parade square. Well, you'd think the new red earth would stand out like a,
Yes.
you know, the guards are all around, you know, you'd think they'd see the difference.
Yeah.
But they never seemed to recognize that.
Huh. Maybe they weren't looking too closely.
I don't know how they missed it.
I saw your membership card in the Caterpillar Club.
Yeah.
I read a book, it must have been written in the early 50s about the Caterpillar Club. So I know a little bit about it. And basically it's an exclusive club for people who have survived by parachuting.
Yeah,
from disabled
a parachute
aircraft.
has saved your life.
Yeah. And I understand the club was actually sponsored by one of the parachute manufacturers.
Yeah, I kind of think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the Caterpillar Club and what it was, so we can hear it?
Well, there's not a heck of a lot to it, really. When you, this is sometime after, you get interviewed and somebody says, if you jumped out of an airplane, did you use your parachute? Well, you belong to the Caterpillar Club. So you fill out a form and you send it to the Caterpillar Company in England, and they send you a little pin, which is a silkworm, and that's your membership identification, and they send you a certificate, and it's a good pin. It's only about a 3/4 of an inch long. It's got an automatic lock on the clasp when you pin it on your lapel or your tie, and it's got 2 ruby eyes. And they send you all the papers, and it's kind of a, they make you feel proud to wear it, really. It's quite it's a very exclusive club.
Yes.
The girls in the parachute, I don't know, often we changed our parachutes. The pilot's parachute was part of his harness. So when he sat on it, like when I got into my seat to fly, the straps and everything was part of me. Now the other rest of the crew, they had their parachutes hooked onto the side of the aircraft, and all they did was pick them up and put them on their chest and then jump. I didn't even have to do that. I just had to make sure the buckle was done up so I could jump, and it was automatic. I was sitting on it. Now, because we compressed the parachute, we had to change it every once in a while. So every time the girl would give you a new parachute, you would open the old one. You'd pull the toggle and watch it open. And kind of gave you a feeling it's a good thing.
It works.
It works. And she obviously made the same remark. If it doesn't work, bring it back. And they always thought that was a big joke. But there were parachutes that didn't. There were I met a couple of Aussies in the hospital that came down together. They're strictly luck. One fellow's chute didn't open, and he crashed into the other chap whose chute was open, and the two of them came down on the same chute. They landed pretty heavily, and that's why they were in the hospital. But this one guy saved the other guy's life. But it was strictly luck that he fell into him. Because there's a lot of guys in the air, you know. You're bound to hit something.
Yeah. Well, I understand that the Parachute Club, in effect, is really a marketing device for
I
the
imagine
company
so.
that makes them. But nevertheless, it's a very, it's very special.
They were good chutes. They were silk and beautifully made, you know. They gave me a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
And it was amazing just how they slowed you up. It's hard to believe. When you see how fast you're traveling, like a two-story building is, you don't waste much time out of a two-story building hitting the ground. But
compared to modern technology, they were fairly crude, but they were effective.
I imagine they were very, very crude.
But they were effective. They worked.
But I don't imagine it's been improved too much.
No.
I don't know.
No. Well, some of the, I mean, it's a sport now, so some of the parachutes are designed with more control over direction and speed and so on. But they saved a lot of lives.
They sure did.
And I assume you would have preferred to be liberated by the Americans rather than the Russians, but
well,
how was that?
Rather, the Russians are they're tough people. They used to come to different dances that we used to see in town. We never went to many dances because we were always flying, but every once in a while, you'd see, they always had their Tommy gun strapped to their back. It was always there, and it was just like stainless steel. It was just so shiny from use. We traveled with the Russian army, and they are rough. They live on nothing. The Russian army travels by horse. They just have you remember the old brick wagons? They used to cart bricks around on the straight sides. They use those with two teams of horses, two at the back and two at the front. When the two at the front fall down because they've been worked too far, they just cut them off and bring the other two up, put them on the front. And that's how they travel. And they have these wagons, and there's hundreds of them with horses. And when the horses give out, they just cut them loose and they just die beside the road. And quite often you'll see a horse with half its side cut off, where the army has cut its steak off for the day, you know, off a dead horse.
You know.
That's how desperate they were to eat. But when we traveled with them, they just sat on benches facing each other, and they serve you well, it's like raw bacon, a slab of it, about 2 inches square, raw, and you sit there and you chew it, and that's what you eat during the day. And every so many hours, the guy in charge of with the rations goes around and gives everybody another piece. It's got the rind on it, you know, it's pretty tough to eat. But if you're hungry enough, of course, you can eat it. That's how the Army travels. But the tank boys are entirely different. The tank boys that liberated us, the tank drivers were all just like you or me. You couldn't tell the difference. And they had a compartment in the tank behind the front seat where they kept their food. And they had some of the most beautiful roast beef I've ever eaten in tins. You could eat it with your hand, just as tender, and no fat, just solid meat. And we traveled with that tank corps one day, and when we left, the driver gave us each a tin of this, and these are large quart-sized tins. And it was a beautiful ration, the best food I'd had for months. But the driver was the only one that was English looking. The rest were all Mongolians. They'd have Mongolians all lined up all over the tank, lying all with their guns poised. I never saw I never knew so many Mongolians existed. And they would kill anything at the drop of a hat. We saw that done in actual one day. It was after the Russians took over, and they had a Russian guard at the gate. And they took the fences down with the tanks, so we were able to go out into the area and look for food, because a lot of the houses had market gardens and so forth. And all the boys they could find carrots and things like that. And they came back this one day, the chap that slept near us, and another chap, they were stopped by a nurse and a little teenager in a Hitler outfit. And this kid, they wanted to get into our camp, get away from the Russians. And they went to this couple to see if they could smuggle them in. And this one chap reported it to the guard. So the guard went out, and the next thing he paraded the two of them up to the gate. And the little kid started to roll his pants up to show where he had been shot. The Russian just put his head up with his hair and just put a bullet through his head and just threw him back down on the ground. And then they took the girl away. And when we walked out of that camp 3 days later, that body was still there. And the guard was still there. Like he was from here to Eric, from the kid lying on the ground. And he just was there 3 days later. You know, you can't believe how cruel they could be. I couldn't.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is the toughest thing when you're in the armed forces and in action is losing friends, or losing even people that don't even know, but to see them being killed so unnecessarily. We had a case one night on the Isle of Man. We had 3 fires in our hill down the middle of the island one night. 3 aircraft that had been in Ireland that were flying to England, Americans, and they were flying, I think it was Mustangs that they used to have, and they were flying in formation. And evidently they hadn't been told this damn island was there with a hill of 2,000 feet. And they hit about 1,500 feet. And the 3 of them, 3 fires. You know, there was so much unnecessary stuff like that. But there again, they were probably just kids anyway, just like the rest of us. We had our instructors at OTU, when we were learning to be converted to 4-engine, our instructors were all from the Middle East, had finished their tours, so they made instructors out of them for a short period, and then they sent them home. So this one day, just before we graduated, these instructors, they were celebrating, they were going home. So they told us that you won't see us anymore, you've got new instructors tomorrow. So they had given them a pilot and an aircraft to fly them up to the Lake District, and like we were in Ossington, and they were going up to the Lake District in northern England. And before going home, they're going to have a little weekend holiday. They never made it. The aircraft crashed, and the whole 7 of them were killed. And what happened when they went to let down at near Dumfries, it was raining, and they decided to let down. They thought they knew where they were, and they let right down into a hill, killed the whole gang of them. And I thought, God, it's so sad, you know, to think that here are the families at home just waiting to welcome them home, and then all of a sudden, no more. That really used to shake me. Made you think. Made you a little more hesitant before you did something stupid.
I guess that kind of accident happens all the time.
It's
seems
more
to concentrate and focus.
It's more concentrated.
You know, it happens, and there's so much stress in time of war.
Well, you can't go to a target, say from London, for example, in England, to Dusseldorf in Germany. You can't go to that target in a straight line and meet your time. Like we always had a time over the target. Like if we'd have a time, say, 2:21 in the morning. Well, we had to be over that target at 2:21 at a certain altitude to drop our bombs, because somebody else had 2:22, you know. And the navigator's job was to make sure we hit that target. Well, we always hit it, because my navigator would start, if he was early, he would start changing our course. We would angle off a bit and fly a little extra distance before joining back to the bombing stream. So when we hit a target, we always hit it within minutes every time. Never missed. But he did it. But some of the others, they would decide, gee, we're too early, so they'd cut off sharp, and they would start flying at right angles to the bombing stream, instead of just joining it quietly on an angle so that you never ran into somebody. But it's, my navigator was a little older than I was. He was 29. So he had a family and so forth, and he looked after himself. He only made one mistake, which he corrected. They have what they call a G box, a navigation. It's a radar type of thing, and he's got a chart with all these colored lines on it. Now they're all different shades, and we got back one night from a trip, and we were healthy. We hadn't any trouble, so there were a lot of guys in trouble. So we thought, well, let's practice our run up to the station and let these guys land ahead of us. So we joined way down near London somewhere, and we started flying one of these colored lines up, which went over our airport. And just before he got there, he said, "Oh my God." He said, "I'm in the wrong color." They had a color. There was a brown, a beigey brown, and a purple, which was a tone, which were very close. And they were about an inch apart on the map. One went right into the hills and the other went over our airport. And if we had let down on the first one, we'd have been in the hills. And we just turned around and went back and made a circle and came back on the right line. And he verified everything. But there is a case where that map should have been redesigned, really. And you should have taken those lines which were so similar, because the navigator just had a little light to read his map by, you know. And he didn't have a spotlight. So that was the only mistake Gil ever made, and he corrected it, thank goodness. But he was a good head.
And the day of liberation from the Germans, what exactly would have happened? The Germans would just leave the camp, and the Russians would move in an hour later?
What they did, they pulled out of their administration. There was nobody in the camp that was German. All the guards and that disappeared. But we were behind barbed wire, so you couldn't do too much, and it was night. And there was a lot of action outside the camp. And it looked like they were setting up to stop trying to stop the Russians. And we did hear eventually when the Russians came in the morning with their tanks, but there were no Germans. The Germans had left, and they left before the Russians arrived, or tried to leave anyway, because when we walked out a few days later, there were signs where there had been battles. There was one place we came across, maybe 1,000 bicycles, not one that you could ride. They were all wrecked. But it looked like the Germans were on bicycles trying to get away, and they had been caught and they'd been destroyed. And we came across a tank, which I've never seen anything that big. Like it was the height of a 3-story building, and it was on fire. It was smoldering, and it was German. It was marked with German markings, and so the Russians had put it out of business. And there were things like that we passed, but there were few and far between, really. The Germans were gone. We did come across a few hundred German with one Russian guard marching them down a road as prisoners.
So they knew.
One guard. That's all they had, and they had about 300 Germans.
So they knew either they had fled and
Yeah.
escaped, or else they'd surrendered. You know. How
Well, the
long-
Russians were, they would go in and they would smash the interior of the houses. When we walked out, we got to a farm area one night to put up, and every piece of glass cupboard that had glass doors on it was all smashed. Everything in the cupboards was gone. They had just stolen everything.
Yeah.
And I think there were about 7 of us. There were a couple of Americans, Englishmen, and Canadians. And we got into this little town, little farm village, really. But we couldn't eat because we couldn't. There were chickens running around, but we had no way of knowing how to kill a chicken. You know? And these couple of Russians came along, and they, through Gilmeister, he spoke the German, and he kind of made a conversation with them. He just pulled out his gun and shot the heads off the chickens. That's how you do it, you know. And they said, "We'll get them cooked for you. There's a woman in her down the street. We saw her too behind the curtains." And they took them down there, and she cooked them for us. And we found other things too. We found sugar underneath beds in the corners of the rooms, and we found different pieces of food downstairs. They'd been trying to hide, and we ended up by having a pretty good meal. In the middle of the meal, these 2 Russians who had saw us eating came in and called us, they had comrades and all this sort of nonsense. And they gave us all a cigarette, which was a kind of a Russian stogie of some kind. It was so strong that it almost tore the throat off me. And eventually this woman came in, and she walked right over to my navigator, and she started yelling at him in German, and he just ignored her. And so when she left, she spit at him. And we asked, what was that all about? He said, "Those 2 Russians are trying to get into bed with the daughter, and she's sick. And she wants us to go over and kick the Russians out." So, no way, you know. No way, Jose.
Well, I understand that the Germans were very brutal when they attacked Russia, and so when
I think so, yeah.
Russia came back,
Because the Russians were that brutal with them.
they
you
were
see.
retaliating. You know, how long would you spend with the Russians before you were back with the English or the Canadians?
Oh, not very long.
A week, maybe.
About 3 days. That's
3
all.
days. Yeah.
Because they couldn't feed us.
No.
And the 7 of us, we walked out one morning to get to the American lines because we knew the Americans weren't too far away. They were at the Oder River, and we got a truck. Some German, he was, I guess Gilmeister, you see, was speaking German. He made this conversation all the time. And he talked this guy into letting us ride in the back. And there was a truck, and he used logs to run it. And we had to stoke the fire in the back with these logs. Every once in a while he'd stop and say, "Put more logs on." And as soon as we got the fire going, away we'd go again. But no gasoline, just logs. And he took us to the Oder and let us off. And the Russians were pretty good. They showed us where the bridge was across the river. It was a rope bridge. And they walked us down, and we got on it. walked across, and then of course the Americans. Once we got over there, it was just like from day to night, or night to day. You know, oh gosh, they had everything over there. The Russians had nothing. There was nobody on the street. There's nobody walking around. It was just soldiers. When you got across the river, baby carriages. Oh, it was just entirely a different world. I mean, needless to say, we all went to bed sick because they gave us food which is too rich for us. I had an orange, and it made me so sick I wish I had died.
Real food after so long.
Can you ask him how long he was a prisoner?
How long were you in the prison camp?
Oh, not very long. We were shot down on November the 6th, and we were liberated on WWII Day.
Oh, so just a few months.
It seemed like 10 years, but it wasn't. I weighed 120 odd pounds. Cause I don't know, it was just amazing. Everything we ate went to water.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
I remember one letter we got through the Red Cross.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we had little cards when we were prisoners to write our family, and they gave us a pencil, and the paper was shiny paper. It was the toughest paper to write on.
Yeah.
And we made the letters as small as possible. But they didn't black anything out of those. I have those at home.
Oh.
My aunt kept them, and I think some of them are missing. I think she only got, say, 50% of them. But we only got them once in a while. They didn't give them to us too regularly.
No.
But you felt sorry for the average German that was working in those camps, because they had the same ration as we had, except they had cigarettes that which were rationed to them, which we didn't have. We got them out of the Red Cross parcels, but they were a good bargaining tool. You could get a tin of Spam for a half a package of cigarettes. Mind you, it was tough to save a half a package of cigarettes. If you could save one cigarette, you were lucky. I had a haircut once by an American for a cigarette. He gave me a shave and a haircut for a cigarette. That's all he did all day long. No small talk, no nothing, just... No, I was telling a friend of mine the other day that for 4 years I didn't own a toothbrush. I never brushed my teeth. I never washed. All the time I was in prison camp. We had nothing but ice water, and it was so damn cold you couldn't dare wash anyway. I hate to think what we must have smelled like. But the first thing they did to us when they brought us home was strip us down and put us in a shower and spray us with powder. Get rid of the I guess we must have been lousy.
Must have been.
I don't remember any of it, but I think it was too cold for them to live too.
What were the cabins like in the camp? From reading about the Great Escape, I gather there were 3 bunks high and
we were only 2 bunks high, but some of them would be 3, yeah.
And pretty hard, pretty thin mattresses and straw.
Oh, they were just slats of wood with a very thin layer of a mattress which had straw in it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were as hard as nails. No pillow or anything like that.
Yeah.
No, we had a test one day. We had, I think it was 16 men in our compound. And out of that 16, there were, say, a couple of Americans from Louisiana. And this one guy was from Quebec, and his family had gone to Louisiana and gone in with that French section. He bragged that he would only smoke a Camel cigarette. He could tell, blindfolded, he could tell you what his cigarette, that it wasn't a Camel. So we ran a test one night, and we had, I think it was 6 different kinds of cigarettes. There were some Canadian cigarettes, and there was a Camel, and Old Gold, you name it, Lucky Strike. And I entered the contest. I called a Sweet Capital a Camel. I didn't have a clue what I was smoking. When you can't see the smoke, you can't taste it. I didn't even know I was taking it. I told them to make sure the thing is lit because I didn't think it was even lit. This guy, and we switched the cigarettes on him, not just once, maybe 8 times. He got them right every time. He never missed his Camel. And as soon as it wasn't a Camel, he knew it. So he knew his Camels.
Time for another break.
Another card.
Sensitive, and if you don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
that's fine. But it's been in the press off and on for years. Bomber Command didn't get a lot of credit for a long time.
What didn't?
Bomber Command. Because there was some controversy about whether there were civilian targets versus military targets.
Well, yes, I can quite believe that. I'll give you an example. The first time, like the night we were on Kiel, for example, when we were on fire over the target, I told my bomb aimer, get rid of the bombs because a fire and a bomb just don't go together. Yeah. And he said, oh, I can't bomb. There are houses below us. You know, that's the thinking. I know this is a guy that's in the Air Force, and he's dropping bombs, and yet he won't drop because there's a house below him. So I could well imagine that you have a group of people that get very upset because they had to bomb that way because bombing is not an accuracy at all. We did Cologne 4 nights in a row. They used a different direction every night to make sure they got everything. They didn't care what it was as long as they flattened the city. And they did flatten. I drove through Dusseldorf on the way to the hospital, and we had a little window in the car we were in, and there wasn't a building standing. Mile after mile, just rubble. Yet the hospital was not touched, hardly. But it was just one of those things. Because Dusseldorf was, we bombed Dusseldorf one night, and we did hit the hospital. And when I got in there, there was an American right across from my bed. There were 2 Americans, actually, 2 beds side by side. And one American was a fighter pilot, and he was completely burnt, except his hands, because his gauntlets saved his hands. The rest of us, right to the bone. And the night that we bombed, he told me that the bombing was so severe that his buddy lay on top of him to protect him. That's the kind of comradeship you had. He said if he hadn't laid on top of him, he may not have made it.
Yeah.
But that's how they survived.
Well, war is awful. There's no
Oh,
war is terrible.
yeah, there are things that are just horrendous.
Yeah. On all sides.
Just ridiculous. And once you see it, it makes absolutely no sense to have one.
No.
But there are people that would say that you were bombing civilians, but you had no choice.
No. No, as you say, the bombing isn't all that accurate for one thing, and for another, you just don't have choice.
No. I have a picture of when we were liberated. We went back to our squadron one day, and I found two pictures of pictures I had taken over targets, and one is all the lights are like this; they're all curved, and that was Kiel. Well, we were on fire over the target. The aircraft was turning. And the camera was running. So it took this picture of this turn before I dropped my bombs. I guess I dropped them in the turn. But we were getting out of there in a hurry if we could.
Yeah.
So we didn't care where they went. But you can't go into even a manufacturing company and bomb it. And hit it. There's too many variables. There's no way you can fly 700 aircraft over a target in, say, 20 minutes, all within, say, 10,000 feet, and keep a straight and level flying. You're weak, you know. You're always turning. You just there's no way. The bomber is always yelling, steady, steady, you know, because he gets quite upset because you're moving when he's trying to drop his bombs.
Well, maybe we can wrap it up then with just a little summary. So you enlisted in when, 1943?
Yeah. I was in the Air Force just about 4 years solid, straight.
So, if you just want to lean back just so that the microphone can pick you up.
Oh, just sit back a little bit. So
Oh,
for the
I'm sorry.
microphone. Okay.
I just leaned forward there so I could
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay, I'll lean forward so you can hear me. So about 4 years, and how long would you be in training in Canada before you went over to England?
Oh, it was close to a year.
About a year
Yeah.
here, yeah. And then you'd be in conversion and further training in England for another year?
Yeah, see, each conversion is going to take at least a month and a half to 2 months. It's there's ground school work on the kind of airplane you're flying and the characteristics. There are rules and regulations of every station, and sometimes the aircraft, they're a little bit touchy. It takes a while you don't just fly them in a couple of hours properly. So you get sent away for 2 or 3 hours to practice. And that's when you have to use your brain a little bit and not over-practice. Don't do things that you haven't been shown how to do. There are certain things like on a Harvard aircraft, which is a trainer, single engine, to put that into a spin, you don't let it turn more than 3 times before you come out of the spin. because if you go beyond that, you may never come out. Once it starts tightening up, it gets too tight for you to get the correction in to kick it out. And you have to be at a certain height before you even try it. There was a picture in one of the messes one time of a Lightning, which was a twin engine with two big fuselages, and on the front page of this magazine, they had a picture of a Lightning who tried to do a loop below a certain altitude, and of course, at the bottom of the loop would hit the runway. So they left a pile of ashes there. And all it was a pile of ashes. You couldn't say what it was. It had been a Lightning. You'd never have known. Because he went straight in and it was just disintegrated. But that's how serious it was to not do the right thing. You can imagine some 18-year-old kid, you know, getting excited about doing a loop and going up and doing a loop and not making it.
And then you would have been in some non-full operating mission.
Oh, you have to have a lot of cross countries. You have to have radar. You have to have night flying. You have to have. You have to have different practices of different exercises.
Yeah.
For example, descent through cloud. We had a trip one night over the Isle of Man. We flew for 3 hours over a cloud. When we came back, it was raining over the station and we couldn't get through the clouds because the mountain was there. So we had a descent through cloud. And I called up and asked the chap on the radar to give me a course to come down. I had 2 Aussie students, and they both sat looking out the window, the front, with their white knuckles showing, and I told them, sit back. If we hit the mountain, you're not going to know it, you know, no use trying to duck. So we went through the exercise. He told me to fly at a certain height, change direction, really come down. And his final remark was, okay, you're at 500 feet. You will see the runway now. I was still at 3,000. And I called him up and told him, I said, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to make sure you knew where I was and you knew what you were doing, because I know the mountain is there and I want to let down and I don't want to hit it. He said, don't worry. So I said, okay, I'll go through your instructions one more time and I'll follow them. So we went through it. And when he said, you're at 500 feet, you'll see the runway now. There was the runway right in front of me. So, but we lost 2 aircraft that night that didn't do what I did. They let down too soon. They set their gyro incorrectly. They flew reciprocal courses. The boys that they're talking to you, they don't know that you're flying away from them. And one of these kids landed in some mountains in Ireland. He just was so far offline, it was pathetic.
Clay, could we just get you for editing?
Pardon?
The editor is going to need to be able to just cut the beginning of the piece. So we need to hear in your own words, I joined the Army in this year, I started my missions in this year, and I came home in this year. If you could tell us that.
Well, I don't know if I have that information right to my fingertips. I know I joined in May 93.
43.
Or 43. and I knew I was on a squadron, in August, September, and we were shot down in November.
That's 45.
And 45. And then in 46 I was released.
What was it like coming back to Canada?
Well, we went to Bournemouth in England for a few weeks to get fattened up. And they fed us bacon and eggs, and we got all our weight back very quickly. And it wasn't what you think it was. It wasn't. I never thought too much about it. When I came home, it was just thank goodness the war's over and we can now get back to realities. But other than that, and I was telling Vern that it was unfortunate that air crew are, when they're together, they're as one. But once the game is over, you never see them again. You don't have anything in common with them. They have different lives. They come from different. There's no relation. But when you're as a group, you fight for each other, and you're very, very close. You do everything together. Everything is done together. Well, you live together. You live 24 hours a day together. You eat together, you fly together, you go to briefings, you do everything together. You drink, you do everything together. So that once that breaks off, you go back to another routine which you've forgotten all about. And working for a living was entirely different than flying for the Air Force. It was nice to go through it, but I wouldn't want to go through it again. There are better ways to spend the war, I think. Met some great people.
Clay, would you be able to tell us when your birthday is and how old you'll be turning?
Pardon?
When is your birthday and how old will you be?
I'm sorry.
When's your birthday and how old will you be this year?
Well, my birthday is in a couple of months, 24th of June. I'll be 95.
And do you enjoy being able to tell these stories and share them with your family?
Pardon?
Do you enjoy being able to tell these stories to your family?
Oh, not too often. No, we have fellows that are old Air Force, and it's surprising. It's very difficult to talk to them. They'll ask what squadron were you on, and they'll tell you what squadron they were on. And that's about it. I think they all have good memories and they all have sad memories. There are a lot of little things that take place during 4 years that you just don't remember right off the bat. But there are a lot of good times that were very good, but you didn't really appreciate it maybe at the time. I went to a show once in one of the theaters where they showed comedy act, and I can't remember too much about the show except the guy that was the star was a good golfer, and part of his act was standing on stage taking a lesson, which he couldn't take. He couldn't do anything right. And finally he says, "Oh, you mean like this?" And he had a whole bunch of practice balls lined up on the stage, and he hit everyone out into the audience absolutely perfect. He didn't miss one. The swing was beautiful, everything was, and the show was funny. There were a couple of American officers sitting in front of me. One guy was rolling in the aisle. He was laughing so hard. And yet I can't even tell you today what he was laughing at. But I know it was a good show. But what was her name? This girl was Fields, I think. Wasn't there an English girl who used to entertain? Gracie Fields? Mm-hmm. Well, this guy that did the show, his name was Fields too, but he wasn't related to her. But he was a born comedian. But he played up to the Yanks and the Canadians. He knew how to make people laugh.
Clay, are you hungry?
Hungry?
Yeah, would you like to have some dinner? We've kept you for so long.
Oh, no, don't worry about me.
We're here for you.
We're all here for you. Let's have some dinner. Thank you so very much. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
This was incredibly